Hello students, welcome to your equity video on gender and sexuality. As always, we talk about equality versus equity, and in the first picture here you can see the example of equality. Equality means everybody gets the same, everyone's treated the same, which at first sounds good, but it's not as good as equity. Equity means we recognize that some people need different treatment or extra help than others, and we provide that. In an ideal world that we're all shooting for in the future, there are no barriers with which we need to overcome in the first place. So, you've seen that before, of course. Again, here are some ongoing resources that are good for everybody to use no matter what your topic is that you choose to research. Let's get started. So, some of the most important theories related to gender and sexuality are the concept of nature versus nurture. So there's a lot of debate and has been for many years over whether our gender identity and our sexuality are part of our natural makeup as far as like biological and just you're born this way, or is your gender identity and your sexuality composed of a lot of more the nurture side, meaning that it's composed of all kinds of experiences and complex things that happen to you over time and make up who you are. In reality, most people would probably say both, right? So there's some natural tendencies for one way or another as far as your identity goes and how you define yourself, as well as your sexuality. But on top of that, your personal experiences also shape it, your surroundings, your reinforcement, your influences. So don't listen to me, make up your own mind, read about it, and that's kind of a theory you can start with. Some additional theories we're going to be just giving a very, very brief overview of here. There's social cognitive theory, cognitive development theory, social constructionism, and queer theory. So these three here in the middle, the social cognitive theory, cognitive development theory, and social constructionism, all have to do with our identity and how it's formed. I'm not going to give a detailed explanation for each, but it's a good starting point for you. If you're interested in these topics, you should go Google them and search them in some articles on your own and some textbooks. So some of these argue that our identity and who we are is developed over time by our small experiences and influences. As a child, when you grow, you have reinforcements. You have someone telling me that something is good or bad. You have someone telling me that I am doing something that is positive because of my identity, and therefore reinforcing the kinds of behaviors they expect to see. So those are some things to think about. A lot of them are similar and they lend each other some ideas. Queer theory is really where you're going to want to visit if you're doing a topic related to anything that has to do with LGBTQ related research. So here's some important people in queer theory over here on the right. These are sort of the beginning thinkers behind this movement, so you should definitely look some of them up if that is your topic. So one of the biggest issues to consider and make sure that you understand if you are researching anything related to this, and even if you're not researching it, just as a teacher you need to understand these things, is the concept of sex versus gender. Sex is assigned at birth. It has to do with just your biological status as male or female. There are cases when it is not clearly defined at birth, but most of the time it's a biological assignment that is given based off of surely just purely physical attributes, chromosomes, and anatomy. Gender, however, is different. It refers to the socially constructed roles, behaviors, activities, and attributes that a given society considers appropriate for boys or girls, men and women. And so we want to think about those two things as separate issues, that your sex is something biological assigned at birth. Your gender is something that you socially construct and define, and how you present yourself or define yourself. And the issue for teachers is that many times children are still trying to understand that. They don't have a full grasp on their gender and how that should be defined. And we need to be very careful as teachers that we are not imposing our own personal views on that, but letting them consider those things and explore them in a really safe and welcoming environment. So here's a great resource for you to check out. This is just where I pulled this set of information from if you'd like to check that link. So, how do children form gender identity? I'm going to move this out of the way here. So most psychologists would say that around 2 to 3 years old, children learn to label others by sex. They learn that there's boys and girls. They learn mom and dad. They learn the basics, right? Now, a little bit later, around 3 or 4 years old, children understand the stability of gender. They start to understand, oh, if I'm considered a boy, I'll stay a boy. This person is always going to be a girl. This person's always going to be a boy. That kind of idea. We know it's much more complex than that as adults, but for toddlers, this is kind of the stage that they start to come to that understanding. Around 4 to 5 years old, they start to recognize that it's a constant aspect of themselves. So according to some of the theories that you're going to hear in a moment, this is also the time, around 3 or 4, up through 5, when children start to experience shame and understand shame and guilt. And so that development of autonomy and becoming an individual person, along with that comes shame. Therefore, this is a very delicate time, and often toddlers are told things like, that's for boys, that's for girls, don't do that, that's for boys or that's for girls, or good, this is for boys or for girls. They're reinforced, those gender stereotypes that many adults have adopted. And so that shame starts to form their identity if they do something that conflicts with that norm. So as teachers, we want to be very careful we're not doing that. All right. This is a nice little handout. You can download your own version of it online. There's lots of them out there. The Gender Unicorn, it's an easy thing that you can share with people if they're struggling with this concept. And it just helps you identify the differences between what gender identity is compared to sex and other aspects of this. Here's some important statistics for you. I'd like you to consider LGBTQ a very serious set of equity topics for teachers because it affects youth greatly. And there's a very large population of homeless youth that are LGBTQ. And many people speculate this is because they're not socially accepted in their home life or in their communities. And a lot of them experience abuse or mistreatment. And so this is really important that we consider this as teachers, that we are hyper vigilant in watching for this kind of scenario, that we are protecting these youth. On top of that, queer youth of color experience these things even more. And so we've heard in other videos about the pipeline to prison and how a lot of people believe that the way we criminalize children in school has a lot to do with race and racial stereotypes. And this is even more prevalent among LGBTQ youth of color. So that's something important for you to consider. You can check out some of these statistics and be aware of that as a teacher. All right, so here's some really important research and resources. And if you're doing some research on your own for a paper, or if you are just curious about these things as a teacher, I think you should explore each of these links on your own. And they'll all talk about things like cognition and gender development, that process that children go through in developing their gender identity. A research article from a psychologist here that talks about how gender identity is in the brain, but a lot of that we still don't understand at this point because we just don't know enough about the brain. But research is kind of digging deeper into that all the time. And so these are some interesting links that you can check out. The last one here has to do with human development and adolescent sexuality. No matter what preference or sexual orientation a young person has, that's a really important stage in their life in adolescence, their development of their sexual identity and sexuality. And I think a lot of times teachers are very uncomfortable with that topic. And so it would be good for you to do some reading on it just to be familiar so that you don't join in that shaming that can occur unintentionally, right? Let me move this again so that you can still see. Okay, so in application, as a teacher, what should I do? As a teacher, I should definitely acknowledge that I am an activist for any issue that any student in my class is facing, regardless of my own comfortability with this issue. Meaning, if you're not very comfortable with these topics, as many Americans are kind of, we come out of this very Puritan set of ideals where we're not supposed to talk about sexuality. If that's you and it's just something uncomfortable for you, I'm sorry, but you are still an activist for any child in your class that is struggling with gender identity or being picked on because of their sexuality or anything like that. You need to be an activist for those issues, right? The next thing, as a teacher, I should be aware of negative stereotypes and toxic attitudes students may exhibit and be prepared to intervene in a caring manner. Like I said, a lot of teachers are uncomfortable with some of these topics and therefore shy away from it, and that includes bullying. A lot of times this bullying occurs and teachers are so uncomfortable talking about it, they just ignore it. And it sounds awful, but I've seen it happen firsthand many times. And it is very important that we are aware and we intervene every time we see it, and we make clear that it is unacceptable in our classrooms and our school campuses. And we need to always be willing to learn and grow. We are lifelong learners as teachers, and it's really important that we don't give up on that. And social expectations change, and equity is important for us to keep at the forefront if we're going to keep growing and learning as teachers. We need to continuously be open to new ideas. With that thought, you can look down here at the bottom. There's a big set of links that are resources for educators. These are wonderful websites that give ideas for lesson plans, give ideas for books. They give ideas for all kinds of activities you can do related to promoting equity among LGBTQ populations in your classroom. And one of the biggest concerns is not just protecting those youth, but also preparing everybody around them to be more accepting. That is the big concern, right? So over here on the right, we have important people. These are psychologists. These people talk a lot about identity, not necessarily specifically LGBTQ topics, but they are very important for you to understand how a person becomes who they are. So you've probably heard of Erickson. We talk about him a lot in education. He goes over the stages of development. Kohlberg is very similar. He has some stages that are defined as far as how our identity is formed, and that's a little more social. And Bandura talks a lot about social systems, particularly family and community. And Freud, you've all heard of Sigmund Freud. He has a lot of theories on psychosexual development. However, a lot of psychologists have kind of moved on from Freud. I just want you to be aware he is in the mix. Doesn't mean you should necessarily abide by all of his theories and believe them, but it's good to be aware. All right, that's it for this video. Good luck on your research. Thank you for watching.